and welcome to the Freedom Pay panel. Personalization pays, how data-driven strategies are shaping retail. My name is Natalie Berg. I'm a retail analyst and founder of MBK Retail, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's session. Today, I'm joined by Chris Cronenthal, president of Freedom Pay, Sulabh Agarwal, who is the managing director of global payments at Accenture. We have Hannah Regan, financial policy lead at the BRC. And last but not least, Richard Lim, who is CEO of Retail Economics. So first of all, a very warm welcome.
Thank you.
We have a virtual audience and a live audience, and I personally would like this to be as interactive as possible. So if anyone in the live audience has questions, please do, as long as you can speak up, please do feel free to ask away. We're going to be covering lots of ground here, so really value your input and want to hear from you as well. So without further ado, let's get started. I think when we think about retail today and the fact that it has been a period of unprecedented levels of change, right? It's been a period of perpetual disruption, and that we've gone from the pandemic right into some fairly significant geopolitical instability, and then the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. So it's been an eventful few years, right? I also think it's an interesting time to kind of take stock, because we've now had 12 months of relative normality. So we are, I think one of the lessons of that over the past 12 months, two things. For me, it's the deceleration in e-commerce sales growth and the fact that we've missed stores, and we really kind of appreciated shopping in the bricks and mortar world. So I think that's going to be a theme that we'll get into in a little bit more detail. And the other theme is that we are living in a very hybrid way. So this hybrid way of living, working, shopping, socializing, exercising is for me, I think that is here to stay. So I guess with those two things in mind, I'm conscious I'm throwing some, kind of a big first question at everyone. But what is your take on the consumer today, and what do you think have been some of the biggest shifts that are impacting on consumer behavior? So I suppose, Richard, if we start with you.
Sure. Big first question.
Big first question. We're going big.
Yeah. But I think, part of what you said, I completely agree with, which is we've been through a number of different shocks over the last couple of years, and we've had the pandemic and that huge shift towards online, and that's led to another shock of the cost of living crisis. And so consumers have been exposed to a number of different waves of disruption themselves, whether it's kind of that, being exposed to new customer journeys because of the pandemic and using online platforms for the first time, discovering new retailers for the first time, but then leading into that, the cost of living crisis having such an intense focus on people's finances. They've had to prioritise value. And they've prioritised value, and they've made trade-offs with other kind of attributes, whether that's quality or convenience or the experience. And so I think one of the words that I would describe what we're seeing today is that kind of like polarisation of consumers. Yeah. And I think we've seen a big polarisation of kind of the more affluent consumers who have generally been more kind of like protected from the cost of living crisis. One of the pieces of research that we did fairly recently just shows that there's about 27% of consumers who've got this kind of keep calm, carry on attitude. And actually the top 20% of kind of in terms of affluence are responsible for 40% of spending. So there's this environment of polarisation and retailers having to adapt to this new way that consumers are embarking on customer journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess also to that point, we know that a lot of consumers accumulated savings during the pandemic, so they were able to dip into that. And also compared to past recessions, it's still a very strong labor market. So I think from that point of view, it's consumers have been probably more resilient than maybe we would have expected.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you, Hannah? What are your thoughts on the consumer today?
Yeah, so we're seeing consumers are really savvy. They're shopping around, they're looking for that bargain, as Richard mentioned, and that is all to do with this cost of living crisis. Everyone is sort of having to count their pennies. But I think you're also seeing polarization in sectors as well of retail. So, dependent on what they're buying, they're more likely to shop around for higher end things. They actually want to focus on, if they're spending more money, they want to make sure it's the right thing. They want to get that really high customer service. They want to feel valued. Or are they just looking for the quick, cheap sort of lower end products. So both the polarization in the customer as to where they're at, but also polarization in what they're buying. And this is really affecting retailers, right? Because retailers know that people are looking for that bargain, so they're having to drive down their prices. It's already such a competitive market, retail, and they're having to really sort of win the customer into their store, which is just squeezing profit margins more and more for retailers. So it's a really difficult time for retailers.
Yeah, absolutely. It does feel like there's a bit of a race to the bottom at the moment, and you've got the discount retailers that you can't sustainably compete with them on price. They're opening up stores in better locations. They're investing in technology themselves and becoming more convenient. So lots to discuss there as well. How about you, Sulabh? How are you seeing the consumer today?
I would agree what Richard and Hannah have said. I mean, if there's maybe one angle I want to add, I think both of them mentioned the word convenience. I think consumers have little patience for any friction, whether it is online experience or in-store experience. And friction is something like people are getting used to abandoning their shopping if there's friction in the journey. And more experiences like one-click experience online as well as in the retail. I mean, if they don't have the size they're looking for or the queue is too long at the till, the abandonment rate is going up like anything. So I think the whole consumer experience expectation has gone up significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as consumers, we just are intolerant of mediocre experiences and mediocre service, right? We just, we want it on our terms, we want it our way. So absolutely. How about you, Chris? What's your take?
Well, it's certainly hard to go last because so many good things have already been said. So I'll try to maybe add to that by first saying thank you so much for moderating. It's great. And two, I think what we're seeing is that, as Richard indicated in the research, we're seeing consumers do a lot more research, but then maybe spending a bit less online and coming back in store. I think because they have fewer precious dollars to spend, that makes that eagerness to touch and feel and see all the more prevalent in this new world. And so I think what we're going to see is the consumer probably go back at a pretty rapid rate to in-store to really enjoy that purchase, which is much more, perhaps a little bit more scarce to them. And at the same time, the retailer's going to have to recognize that. And they're going to have to make, to Sulabh's point, that experience so much more special, so much more frictionless and easy, because there are just going to be slightly fewer sales to go around, especially in that luxury space, where not only are you going to see slightly less sales, but each one then becomes just that much more important to preserve that brand uniqueness and touch and integrity throughout that experience.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I completely agree. I think we are seeing this bifurcation in retail, and I mean, my view is that retailers today have to either save their customers' time or enhance it, right? There's no middle ground anymore. And I guess just to elaborate on that a little bit more detail, Chris, I mean, how do you think that it's down to the individual retailer to know their customer, to know their needs? Because I guess not every store needs to be entirely frictionless. Not every store needs to be an experience, but I think there are some themes there, and that there are basic hygiene levels, and that consumers' expectations around friction at the checkout, for example, and equally on the experiential side, I feel like you have to give consumers, if they're going to, we have access to everything at our fingertips today, so you have to give your shoppers a really good reason to ditch their screens and come into the store. So that's a lot for retailers. I mean, where do they get started, and how do you go about making those decisions?
We believe ultimately that is a technology problem, right? And frictionless and seamless is ultimately like a beauty in the eye of the beholder thing, right? It's what is your brand, what is your purpose, what tries to make you differentiated? Is it a fast experience? So the technology that you need needs to support that fast experience. You need to have, very brisk checkout experiences. You need to have a very brisk online checkout experience, and if anybody's crossing channel, that has to happen quickly, right? Which is a different use case than maybe I'm a luxury goods retailer, and part of my customer expectation and experience is not that the checkout goes really fast, because maybe that's part of the experience, is luxuriating in the checkout and being like, oh, I have this great product or service. So I think in that case, it's really that retailer embracing technology that pulls in, how do you personalize that checkout? How are your associates armed as best as possible with knowledge about their consumer that allows them that maybe my job isn't to make a checkout experience 1 second, it's to make it 5 minutes, but during that 5 minutes, I have all the technology necessary to understand that consumer and reinforce my brand value, message, and proposition so that when he or she leaves my business, they had that great kind of last mile experience. So again, we reconcile all of that into really a technology puzzle for the merchant to understand all those pieces to that checkout experience and how to tie them together.
That's a really interesting point, Sulab. You're nodding. I feel like you've got something to share here.
Maybe the one area I would say that as a retailer you need to be thinking about is what is the end-to-end or the holistic experience you want to provide, right? Like if you're a fashion retailer, do you want to be the destination of fashion for your consumer, which is not just, you know, selling the various goods that you do today, but do you want to have the various other parts of the experience? Can you rent clothes? Can you get all the other advice? Can you? How are you associated with the whole end-to-end experience and the more upcoming experience? Same with, say, travel, mobility. You take any space, and how are you actually being the destination of the end-to-end experience, or are you one cog in the wheel for the customer? And I think that's becoming more and more important for the retailers to think about enabling the whole customer experience, and whether it is through in the digital world going towards the super apps, giving subscription-based services, or whatever that is, right? Including delivery in how you give premium services. But I think thinking about the end-to-end journey and the experience and fulfilling the whole thing is quite important in current times.
That's really interesting. And you both kind of touched on an important point, which is the role that store staff play in delivering that experience. So I wonder, I mean, I don't know, I'm going to come to you, Richard. What's sort of your view on how the role of the store associate might evolve in the future?
Yeah, of course, it depends on the part of the market, the price point, the shopper mission, and why, you know, and what's promoting people to go into store in the first place. I think the wider point is that the purpose of the store is changing.
Yeah.
Retailers have recognised that the purpose of the store is changing, and they're adapting the store to support a much more digital influenced customer journey. And so some of that is about having digital touch points within store that supports an online part of the customer journey, but it's just that the value of the store has changed. It's become much more, or seen much more as almost like a marketing expense, where, you know, the store is there, it's there to distribute experiences, it's there to build experiences, it's there as an effective customer acquisition tool, and then whether or not a consumer then goes on to buy online or buy in store or do click and collect or ship from store from home, I think there's that real recognition that the role of the store's changed, and it's changed permanently, and it's just about how to leverage technology and digital technology to really enhance that customer.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. I think the store needs to be a digital asset, and I think that's an important point as well. 10 years ago, as an industry, we were still looking at stores as liabilities, right, in this digital era, whereas now, very much, stores are assets when repurposed in the right way. Sorry, go on.
And I was just going to say, and you look at the retailers that are doing it really well, and they see them as assets, and you know, Next is a really good example of that. You know, they've got over 500 stores, over 50% of their sales are online, but amazingly 80% of their online returns go back into store, and they're just using stores in a different way to support the way that customers want to shop.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's an important point. And is that stores also have to be fulfillment hubs as well, don't they? They have to offer an experience, they have to be digitally integrated, and they have to also, you know, facilitate those e-commerce sales. Yeah. Hannah, you've got something to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's also this pressure on retailers that everyone's kind of mentioned to be more and do more, and we're seeing it like Gen Z and millennials are more focused on, they want to spend their money on things that give them memories, that bring experiences. They're also very socially conscious. They want to make sure they're shopping with retailers that have a good social impact. So there's, you know, you end up with retailers having to focus on these things just to get people in the door. So an example, you're seeing like record shops put on gigs in their stores so that people come along, they get the experiences, the memories, but they can shop while they're there. And then, you know, it's save our local venues. It's like, it's also got a social impact as well. Or things like big department stores putting on champagne evenings to make their customers feel really welcome. It's things they have to go above and beyond beyond just to get the customer in the door sometimes.
Absolutely. I fully agree with that. I think that retailers do need to kind of roll out the red carpet for their customers today. And I mean, a trend that I've been talking a lot about recently is this democratization of white glove service. This idea that things that used to be limited to VIP or luxury shoppers is now just the norm, right? It becomes more and more competitive out there. Chris, if we can go back to you and talk a little bit more about payments and cutting friction at the checkout. I mean, this has been a huge area of focus for the retail industry over the past few years, accelerated by the pandemic and the rise of kind of low-touch shopping. We all got used to contactless payments and scan and go and checkout-free shopping. Where are we now, and where might we be heading in this space? Is it going to get even more frictionless?
Ultimately, I think it does. And one of the big changes that probably will persist throughout the pandemic is that consumers prior to the pandemic were maybe a little bit hesitant to download a particular retailer's app, right? Because it was never a pandemic world. So inherently, you downloaded maybe your sacred couple apps that you would let on your phone. And I think what the pandemic did is it gave a giant jolt to the consumer that said it's actually kind of normal to download random apps all the time and maybe just jump into the world of a merchant's got an app and you've got to use it or download it, interact with it. And so I think when you think about payments, there's going to be the traditional payments going to live for a bit longer, right? And in fact, according to Richard and the team's report, cash is actually slightly on the rise. So there's going to be a pretty strong argument that says,
interesting.
Right,
yeah.
In the next 3 to 5 years, the traditional tap and pay, EMV, chip and pin, et cetera, payments going to live. But what it also creates an opportunity is, again, not to steal all of Richard's thunder here, but he did mention that 80% of sales are online, but 60% of returns are in store, something close to that. I think where you see payment go, or really more importantly, the guest experience go, is that by getting people to come in store for a return or et cetera, combined with the consumer's preference to download an app and engage more digitally, you're actually going to invert the conversion. Where in the pandemic, the app got you to go to the store after the pandemic. After the pandemic, the in-store experience, combined with the consumer that's willing to download my app, creates an opportunity for that merchant to drive people now to an app that then inverts and creates an in-store experience that then leads to an endless aisle or digital experience, which then adds to a frictionless experience. Because if my card that I used when I went in store is automatically in my app and it already says, here's what you just bought, here's our suggestions, I think it's that fluidity of engagement that's going to increase versus necessarily the form factor.
Interesting.
If that makes sense.
Interesting. So, Sula, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, payments is changing, right? And we did a survey recently, global survey, 16,000 consumers on the payment preferences. And what was surprising for me is that digital wallets were like head-to-head against card payments generally. And digital wallet as a concept didn't exist very many years ago. And I think as a consumer, everyone is looking for easier ways to make payments. So I mean, if you look at the online options and the e-com options, again, as a consumer, you want all kind of local payment methods, right? Alternate payment methods, because like the basket abandonment rates are impacted significantly if you have the local payments methods available. If you have got long card number to enter, the mistakes and the time it takes to do so, like pre-filling and creating wallets there is also another thing which is kind of on the rise, and we can see like there's more and more consumers going in that direction. So I think payments and the act of the transaction itself and the services you provide around it are evolving significantly, including like the trust and the ability to say like this is not going to be a fraudulent transaction is quite key, because that's what also leads to various declines and basket abandonment.
And to maybe take that just a quick step further, as things move more into that digital wallet space, you're inherently going to see a more aggressive play for pay by bank, right? Which is pretty prevalent, to your point, in certain areas and regions, but that'll become more and more mainstream, where because it is all moving into digital wallets, pre-filled information, just the ease of then that last step, which is, and now I can just pay by my bank, right, it gives consumers that option. It reduces costs for merchants. So I think you'll see a center of gravity move in that direction as well.
And as a layman here, what's the benefit for the consumer to do that?
The benefit of the consumer is ultimately not putting something on an interest-bearing account. It's having direct access to your capital. And I think also as pay by bank becomes more prevalent, you're going to see merchants to get more sophisticated with a deeper ability to then interact with that banking data and ultimately start to further personalize that checkout experience. So once I've, as a consumer, gotten over the mental hurdle of pay by bank, merchants that are set up for forward-leaning technologies are going to say, well, gosh, you signed up for pay by bank. Will you also give me a little bit of an insight into your spend behavior? Because I can give you further discounts, subsidies, and personalization if you do so. So ultimately, that's where it goes, I believe.
Interesting.
I think it's about consumer choice, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the checkout, I need to know where I'm paying from, and if I have, you mentioned excess savings saved from the pandemic, I should be able to pay from there. If I want to borrow at that point in time, or get the buy now pay later offering, or any other embedded offering, including insurance or whatever it is, I should be able to get it. And then I'm going back to, I need to have choice, and I need to have an experience which is holistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it is about giving customers choice in so many facets of retail. Hannah, you're nodding. You've got something to share.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, open banking, pay by bank, it's so interesting how different markets are receiving it based on what is the benefit to the consumer, right? Because in the UK market, we don't actually have that benefit for a consumer to switch. It's not there. Whereas in other countries, it's there, and that's why it's taking off more. It's a real holdback in this country. And actually, you mentioned digital wallets. Digital wallets almost took away the USP of pay by bank in this country, because before digital wallets, it would have been you didn't even need your card, you can just scan with your phone. But digital wallets got there first, which is essentially paying by card. And now open banking doesn't have that USP to consumers. So it's a real hurdle at the moment for retailers to try and overcome, or retailers, regulators, industry to overcome. How do we actually make it a viable option for our consumers?
Interesting. I'm going to come back to personalization, but Richard, I want to bring you in, and I wondered if you could share a little bit more about the research that you've just published, and if there were any findings that maybe surprised you.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of findings that surprised me.
I have a couple as well.
At the heart of it, what we really wanted to understand is how the cost of living crisis had affected the customer journey right through the different stages, right from awareness, research, purchase, fulfillment, service and returns. And one of the key findings really was at the heart of this, consumers are becoming, because of the cost of living crisis, they're spending more time browsing and researching. They're looking for the best value for money. They're looking at alternatives in terms of cheaper retailers, cheaper brands, and they're using that pre-purchase part of the customer journey in a slightly different way. So what we actually found in the research is that the average consumer is spending 4 hours a week researching non-food products, and that's increased by about 18% compared to last year, or 35 minutes. So there's a huge shift in terms of people being much more considered at that part of the customer journey. Again, what was really interesting though is that that's being driven by digital. So people are using that time online to search for price comparison sites, or using digital technology to support that part of the customer journey. But that is not translating to higher e-commerce sales. So they're using online in a different way. The pandemic has impacted the way consumers are leaning on digital to support their journey, but it hasn't necessarily benefited online sales in a way that you might have expected. And kind of subsequent to that, I think what's really interesting is that the competitive advantage now really is leaning towards multi-channel, omni-channel players, where they're using digital technology, they're using online, they're using social media, and all of the kind of the digital tech that sits behind that to support that more kind of joined up customer journey between digital and physical. So I think that's probably some of the main, most interesting findings.
Yeah, especially the fact that it didn't translate into greater sales or greater sales volumes when you strip out inflation. I think that just shows how difficult the market is right now, and also how savvy we are and how digitally enabled most transactions are, regardless of whether they take place online or in store. So interesting stuff. Something that surprised me was that 86% of respondents said that they shop almost entirely online. That really surprised me. Yeah.
I guess in a way it's just that online is used at some part
in the journey.
Whether it's around that research phase, or whether it's click and collect, or whether it's to track delivery of parcels. But heavily leaning on online.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting as well, we've done do these kind of consumer panels a lot over many parts of the year, and if we're really focused on kind of understanding behaviours of online shoppers, we want to screen out the people who don't shop online. And increasingly, that proportion of people that do not shop online
getting smaller.
It's pretty zero now.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I guess most people would do a mix of online and offline. I think going back to the whole point around omni-channel and shopping on our terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. I guess just to kind of elaborate on that in a little bit more detail around the discovery stage of shopping, and knowing that as consumers, we're absolutely up to our eyeballs in information. We're hyper-informed. We've got everything we need. But I wonder, this is a little bit of a curveball question, Richard. I'll warn you. But I just wonder, you've got social media that is useful for inspiration, particularly for those non-food categories, those sort of more considered purchases and more maybe aspirational side of things. And then you've got the kind of pure not convenience, the pure kind of hunting for bargains, price comparison sites, and really doing your homework. Are you seeing shoppers kind of looking across the board? Are they just utilizing digital tools at their disposal, sort of regardless of the category that they're purchasing?
It's really interesting. I think it does depend on the shopper mission. And so, like you say, you pointed out convenience, but if we're shopping for food, for example, usually it's like we just want a frictionless purchase. Whether that's online or in store, we don't necessarily want to go in and have a white glove experience when we're buying our groceries. So I think it's about identifying what consumers want depending on the shopper mission. And really understanding that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if anyone here has seen the Ask Instacart tool. It's their Chat GPT generated video. Sorry, it's not video. It's you as a consumer. What you do is you ask, can you give me a recipe for fish tacos, for example? And then instead of kind of searching, it just provides a whole list. Everything's integrated and added to your basket. And I think we think about the future of retail. And to your point, I know grocery shopping, especially online grocery shopping, is it's a chore for a lot of us, having to plan meals, and it's something that we do on it's a habitual category. We do it every week. So I think when we think about the future of e-commerce and within grocery, there's so many interesting things happening, and retailers looking to address pain points there as well, and providing a little bit of inspiration while still keeping things frictionless as well. So interesting stuff. But I digress. So if we go back to personalization, how do you think consumer habits, I'm looking at you, Silev, how do you think consumers' views on personalization have evolved in recent years? Are consumers more willing to give up a little bit of data in exchange for a more tailored and relevant experience?
Very much so. I mean, if you look at even like online retail, the experience is enhanced even beyond the whole e-commerce taking off. I mean, let's take the example of fashion again, right? It is one experience to go and buy some clothes online, and it is a different experience if you can do it on try before you buy. Right? And what's behind try before you buy? Of course, the cost is huge, right? Like, imagine you sending out all the clothes, all the returns coming in, but data is quite key, because if you as a retailer know how many what is the stock I have, how much stock am I holding, where in with the like the courier companies or equivalent in the whole supply chain is my product. What is the price I've paid? How has this customer, responded in the past? And you bring that data together, which is why a lot of retailers want to get all the payments data, the courier and the supply chain data and their own pricing data, everything together to say, well, how do I optimize the try before you buy experience? For example, I think that's where the personalization is going to the next level, which is to say, well, I need the data to be able to actually maximize the sales and be able to offer such kind of personalized experiences to the consumers.
Yeah, interesting. How about you, Chris? Any thoughts?
Well, I think that thesis in general is spot on. I would say in general for consumers is willingness to be personalized, right? We actually did a different research report at FreedomPay, which is not yet released, but we found that there are actual very specific monetary values of which thresholds of millennials and Gen Z will agree to be personalized. So for example, going back to open banking, there's quite literally a dollar value that if you hit in incentivization to that consumer, they will agree to let you heavily personalize them. And so I think, especially when you compound that with the retail economics report and you understand that consumers are willing to go much further now, spend more time looking for deals or things that appeal to their value sense, to combine that with what Sula was saying, if you had all the data as a retailer and then you knew those thresholds for incentivization, it allows you to unlock that next level of personalization. And so I think it's that whole consortium of kind of facts coming together that's going to dictate the retailers that will be able to have the systems in place that will give them access to the data to provide the right value and incentivization to that consumer that ultimately leads to a deeply personal experience.
So what's stopping retailers? What are the barriers now? Is it just that retailers have so much to balance in terms of prioritizing tech, or what are your views in terms of the barriers?
We would argue it's a technology deficit problem.
Okay.
It's just a challenging environment. I think in the retail economics report, one of the stats was showing the profitability or gross margin of retailers going from, I believe, whatever it was, 9% to 6% to 4%. I'm not getting those numbers exact right, but there was clearly a drop in compression of the profitability, or at least the margin available, that generates cash flow and reinvestment and all those important things. So you're coming out of a supply crunch, a labor crunch, an inflationary crunch, and yet consumers are demanding faster, frictionless, more personalized experiences, and that costs money to achieve. So I think what we'll see is the brands that are established enough to make those investments now, you're going to see a thinning of the herd almost, and then kind of like super strong brands come out that manage to stick that landing and be able to pivot into almost technologically enabled retailing.
Until it just becomes the norm, right?
Yeah.
Basic hygiene. Yeah, interesting.
So just to add to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Chris, your figures are spot on. But what we've seen is that that the margin for retailers has been continually eroded over the last decade, and we've got costs that are rising through labour costs because of the shortage of labour, logistics costs, utility costs, business rates remains a significant burden, card fees, and all of these are aggregating together to really put so much pressure on margins at a time when consumer spending is that much softer as well. At the same time, though, the retailers that do have the strongest balance sheets, the deepest pockets, and have the motivation to invest in the continued digital transformation right throughout the entire supply chain of their businesses, will be the ones that will emerge in a very strong position as we come out of this economic downturn.
Yeah, interesting. And you're right, it's that dangerous combination of rising costs and subdued demand, and it just puts pressure on retailers to make really difficult decisions.
Yeah.
Hannah, do you have some thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is where payments gets exciting, right? It's where innovation comes through, and there's so many possibilities of what could come next. I heard the other day of a retailer where you can just scan the label in store and it automatically pays, and then you just walk out of the shop. So innovation in payments is exciting. That's where the costs are really, really, as Richard said, are really getting to retailers. So profit margins are squeezed, costs are rising, cost of doing business crisis is here, and And card fees is a huge expense for retailers in this country. Huge expense. Yes, we need the PSR and government to do their work on that, but also we need competition, and competition comes back to open banking and open sort of alternative payment methods, because these could offer a much cheaper alternative, which helps retailers with the costs that they're facing. So yeah, we need, it's that balance, isn't it? You need the innovation to really take off, and then that will help the retailers, but that's where the doors are open, because it does offer an alternative that is cheaper.
Yeah, interesting. Just to pick up on your point around the different ways of paying today and kind of what things might look like in the future. I mean, there's so much experimentation right now, isn't there? And I think as consumers, to me, it feels like consumers are, we're ready for it, right? We've adopted this technology during the pandemic, and what's interesting to me is that a lot of this innovation in terms of checkout free spaces and frictionless checkout more generally has happened in the food space, to your point around convenience and wanting to get in and out quickly. But actually, I think it's interesting, we're now starting to see it in non-food retail as well. So Inditex, for example, which runs Zara, they're getting rid of their plastic tags, the kind of security tags, which has been a real barrier at the checkout, for self-checkout. So, if we start thinking about how this might change in the future, customer expectations around frictionless checkout and convenience, it's not just Inditex, you've got M&S trialing self-checkout in non-food as well. Some customers won't want it, some customers will still want that human touch, and if you look at what's happening, there's an example of a supermarket in the Netherlands, Jumbo, that's doing slow checkout lanes where you can actually go, talk to a human being if you don't want all that automation. So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to knowing your customer, doesn't it? So I guess, what are your views, though, in terms of if this becomes more commonplace in non-food retail, how do you think that will help to accelerate adoption across the board? What do you think, Chris? In terms of consumers demanding more frictionless payments, frictionless experiences at the checkout in a physical setting?
Any experience is expected to be smooth, right? At the end of the day, frictionless is really a definition of meeting the customer's expectation of what checkout should look like. So inherently, you're seeing a drive towards that. You're seeing consumers want that. That's where the Amazon Just Walk Outs come, right? There's a reason those solutions are being put out in increasing rapidity, is because ultimately customers want that experience. But I think there's always going to be that counterbalance, right? You gave the Jumbo example where some people just want a slow checkout experience. They get nervous. They don't want to feel the pressure. They don't want to feel like somebody's standing behind them, and because it's self-checkout, they're the only barrier to that next person going, and it creates anxiety, which might even leave a bad brand impression. So there's going to be an inherent push towards frictionless. I think it's really about the retailers understanding what does frictionless mean to the type of a brand experience that they want to deliver.
Just comment quickly on that. We also have to be careful of inclusivity, right? That some people need those slow checkout lanes. Some people still want to use cash. They might need it for a budgeting tool. That's what a lot of people that are using cash are using it for. So we do have to really be careful that we don't go so digitized that we end up excluding certain segments of society.
Yeah, and also I think you always have to balance seamless with soulless, because sometimes these stores can feel a bit clinical and lacking in warmth. Great. I think we probably just have time for a couple more questions. I want to touch on loyalty, because here in the UK we've seen loyalty schemes go digital in a really big way in recent years. We've seen Tesco and Sainsbury's moving towards more personalized pricing. And I'm just, to your earlier point, Chris, around shoppers using apps and getting more comfortable with that technology. What do you think the opportunities are in terms of, and do you think we'll see a real shift in customer expectations in terms of wanting real, relevant, tailored, real-time rewards, discounts, the instant value, instead of kind of accumulating points over a long period of time and then cashing them in for like a £5 voucher down the road, which I don't think is really reflective of how we shop today. But what are your views on loyalty more generally and where it's going?
It's a great question. There's always going to be a yin and a yang of loyalty. The consumer is always willing to accept your product at a slight discount, right? So I think there's several strategies in play there. First and foremost is is loyalty something that the merchant can measurably demonstrate is actually creating the behavior that they want, right? There's a very often used anecdote in the industry of the subway stamps, where the subway stamps, they didn't actually change behavior, they were just giving out free subs because the people that would earn enough subs to get free ones were just going to go to Subway anyway. And so I think if you were to ask a consumer, do you want a loyalty program that automatically recognizes you and gives you free stuff or discounted stuff? Of course, assuming it's being respectful of my privacy. The counterbalance to that then is the pressure on the merchant to say, well, obviously our consumers want to be incentivized, but what is the purpose of incentivization? Is the purpose of incentivization to get net new promoters? Is the purpose of incentivization to unlock purchase for people that might not be able to get to that next rung? So I think there's a tremendous demand for loyalty. I think it just conflates with personalization. And balancing the two is really important, because personalization done right often ends in a loyalty or an incentive program that drives meaningful net new behavior that you want to encourage. And so I think it's sort of axiomatic that a consumer says, yes, more, better, faster, cheaper. It's up to the merchant to give them that feeling in a way that drives, again, it's either an aggregate, net promoter benefit, so my friend's friend now goes kind of thing, or I'm going to go from a low margin buyer to a high margin buyer, or increase my basket size. So again, definitely a demand, and I think that'll continue to be a strong thing, especially when the consumer has continued financial pressure. It's just making sure it's done in a way that's sort of net benefit to everyone.
Yeah, and I guess also beneficial for the retailer, right? Because it's not in their interest to offer these blanket discounts and give promotions to people that would have paid full price.
Right.
So this is where data comes in. Sula, what are your thoughts on loyalty and where it's going?
I think it's a balance, right, between consumer duty. For example, in the financial services world, you will use that term, which is you need to be fair to the consumer, but at the same time, like we were talking about, all these pressures on the retailers, and when you look at the data that the loyalty schemes allow you to collect, the personalized advertising, which could be a completely separate revenue stream, the personalized product proposition, various others. I think it is, if done in a responsible way, it is a huge opportunity which is not fully tapped. Like, I think one of the largest commerce shop online was growing at 7% year on year, but the advertising revenue was growing at 23-24% year on year. And I think you had to realize, like, there are other spend categories that you want to tap into if you want to create new revenue streams, and there's clearly an opportunity there.
Interesting. Richard, did you have something, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, echo the comments, but and I guess the only thing I'd add with loyalty is that retailers need to tread a very careful balance between offering rewards and loyalty with creepy kind of use of their data. So and consumers are aware of that. They don't necessarily, and there's lots of different stories about
creepy versus convenience.
Exactly, the creepy convenience line, and so for retailers to really understand what that means for different consumers, depending on whether it's age or different demographics or much more sophisticated segmentations of their data, and then also the point about not giving away margin for free. Being able to segment, using the data to be able to segment by profitability, and then being able to use that segmentation to provide a much more tailored communication. I think where the industry's heading.
Certainly. One last topic I want to just briefly touch on. We've talked a lot about the discovery stage and the need to, the increase in browsing, the need to utilize digital tools to make the most informed decisions. What happens post-purchase? Because to me, that feels like it feels a bit more of an afterthought. What happens after you make that transaction and walk out the door? And I'm just thinking, we have this technology, to your point about being connected with shoppers via apps and social media and whatnot. I mean, why don't retailers send you a text after you leave the store and say, did you enjoy your purchase today? Or maybe here's a discount for the future if you, share this on social media. Why should retailers be thinking more about the post-purchase experience? Anyone? Have I stumped you with my last question?
My gym does that to me all the time, and I think, I would expect that experience. It can become a little bit overwhelming if I'm all the places I'm doing purchases from, but anything which is significant, I would see that as a really good opportunity.
I mean, it happens in luxury, right? But is it something that should only be in luxury, or is it something that the rest of retail might consider adopting?
Because if I go to Oxford Street and I spend a day wandering all the shops, and then I'm going to get bombarded on my phone, I'm not sure I need that.
Might have the opposite effect.
I think it's about this kind of equitable exchange of value, isn't it? And so so consumers are prepared to give away data. They're prepared to answer questions like that. Did you have a good experience? If there is some kind of benefit behind it, and so I won't name the retailer, but I was talking to a particular retailer that was just saying that after someone's done the checkout, we then hit them with like an email about did that fit you? Because they want to get data on kind of the sizing and things like that.
Yeah.
Did you have a good experience? They want to understand about the checkout procedure. And then there was kind of like 3 emails that they received before, that there was essentially of no value to the consumer. It's about the retailer being able to collect data to try to improve their processes. So it's getting a balance right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. Okay, final question. I promise you guys have been up here for a long time. We've talked about all the changes happening in retail. I think it's clear that retailers need to continue to reinvent to stay relevant to their customers. What advice do you have to retailers? What would you say retailers need to prioritize over the next 12 months? I'm ending on a big question as well. And Richard, I'm going to start with you. No time to come up to think of an answer.
Right. So I think the biggest challenge is going to be around the steep curve of technological progression over the next 5 years. I think we've seen an explosion of AI technologies, especially over the last kind of 6 months with ChatGPT and there being a lot of awareness around technology. And I think and there's kind of 2 sides to this in terms of the digital transformation piece and how retailers and brands are using AI to drive better efficiencies, drive more sophisticated kind of data science and understand their customers better. But actually from a consumer side as well, a lot of consumers hear about AI, but this is the first time I think that they can really recognise how AI is going to impact their everyday lives. And when that starts creeping into how we discover new retailers, discover new products, when we're kind of tapping on our ear twice to say, where's the nearest place I can buy, a white t-shirt, or they're asking about who's going to offer me a black dress between £80 and £100 that will do next day delivery, and AI is the tool that people are using to discover products. I think that's going to be very interesting to see how retailers and brands navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. How about you, Hannah?
My advice to retailers this year would be know your customer. I think all the topics we touched upon have been, this would be great for this section of consumers. This would be great if you're high value, but maybe frictionless is better for low value. So I think it's so key that you get to know who is shopping and what do they want from you as a brand. Do they want loyalty? Do they want discounts? Or do they want quick, easy in and out? So I think, that's my advice in this year. Get to know your customer.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the most important rule in retail, right? You have to be relevant to your customers. And I think despite all this change, the principles of retailing, the things that drove loyalty 50 years ago, are still relevant today. Price, convenience, quality. So absolutely. Sulabh, how about you? What's your advice to retailers in 2023?
I think Richard and Hannah have covered it. And actually, Chris said it is a technology problem. So I would say all of the above. I mean, I'm super excited about Gen AI and what it can do. And the use cases are phenomenal. And that will change actually how business is done in the future. But at the same time, I think getting to the basics, understand what your consumers want, what is your overall proposition, how do you diversify your offering, which includes the full holistic customer experience, and enable it through technology, which is quite hard. And don't forget about payments.
Thank you. And Chris, I've gone to you last again.
There's a lot of pressure to wrap up here, so I'm trying to think big. But it would just be verbose, to be perfectly honest. I think the colleagues here have covered it well with regard to technology being pretty much at the forefront of at least the next 5 to 10 years of the retail evolution. So I'll go out with a bang by saying thank you so much for moderating the panel. Just a tremendous job, and we appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. Well, the last thing to do is to thank you as the panel. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I think lots of food for thought, and I look forward to continuing the conversation after. So thank you.
Good. Cheers.